Hey guys, how's it going? It is Kara here with another Infinite Magicraid video. And in today's video, I want to talk about mastery and how it works, exactly how it affects your character, and some of the things I learned along the way through testing this. And so I only tested this on HP burn characters and bleed characters. Didn't really mess with poison characters, just didn't get around to it, and I had no intention of building a poison character. So me personally, all I cared about was the HP burn and the bleed. And here's the things that I found. Maybe this works differently for poison, but I would be surprised because it works identically for the HP burn and the bleed characters. So how mastery works in this game for at least these two characters. And I'm going to start with HP burn because this is by far the most popular debuff. Bleed and poison are kind of niche and require their own separate teams, whereas HP burn seems to be the best way to progress in this game, by far the best debuff. So let's start with that. So how HP burn works is the target takes damage of 8% of the max HP each turn before action when self is under an HP burn status. The damage caps at 30% of the attacker's max HP and ignores defense. So stackable up to 5 layers. So all mastery does is whatever your actual total is here. So I have 37%. So whatever the damage I would do, whether that be 8% of the target's max health, or if they have a ton of health, it caps at 30%. It's going to take that amount of damage I would have done and then times it by 1.37 in my case. And that's exactly mastery. And I tested it at 8% mastery all the way up to 66% mastery, and it was a linear percentage increase all the way through. Feel free to test it at higher mastery amounts just to make sure it's still linear. But I saw absolutely no drop off between at least those percentages there. So that same with bleed. I tested it with that much mastery on bleed, and it did the exact same amount of increase of that exact percentage that you give it for mastery. So the things that I thought were interesting about this is how it affects building your character. Because for the most part, I was looking, okay, so if that increases the damage by whatever percentage of mastery it is, we have to consider a lot of things when it comes to our character, when it comes to stats and what it means for building our teams and what we should prioritize on. So when it comes to any DoT character, by far the biggest priority is going to be hit effect. And this is going to be the thing that's, non-negotiable. You need a ton of it. Ideally you'd want more of it. I do have an aura here that's making me cheat it out a bit. So 12% more. I like to be in the range of like 90 to 100%. I haven't tested the specifics there because I think that's going to take a ton of testing because it's RNG and there's really no way to know for sure on exactly what kind of hit we're going to need to be able to guarantee a land, if this game even has a guaranteed able to land. Whereas like, for example, in Raid, there's always a 3% chance that you can get resisted. So maybe this game has that, but that's going to be super hard to test. Whereas these damage numbers were way easier to lock down. So that's 100% going to be a massive priority for your character, is going to be hit, because if you can't land it, then all the damage is pointless. But then from there, then we have to determine, do we focus on survivability? Do we focus on speed? Or do we just focus on a ton of mastery to do as much damage as possible? And for the most part, when it comes to a ton of content in this game, whether it be the guild boss or in dungeons here, and Dungeon Ruins, pretty much every single one of these, or in Tower of Mark. So pretty much every single piece of content, we're going to be capping out on that HP burn status. Right? Unless we had like over 1 million health, we're always going to hit that 30% HP reduction threshold. It's going to camp out. We're not going to be doing 8% of their damage. We're only going to be doing 30% of our own health. So then we have to weigh now, because of how HP burn works, what's actually better. Do we care more about mastery? Do we care more about survivability? Because if you've been trying to push these dungeons, you know that survivability is a big issue with these, because these are very hard things. Like being able to just get wrecked by the bosses is very common. So I wanted to see how much of a difference in damage I'm going to be gaining per unit of mastery or HP. And I defined per unit of that as, if we go into equipment here, there's rolls that you can get on your gear. So like, let's say, effect res, healing effect, and in our case that we care about mastery percentage and HP percentage. And if you go through how pieces work here, they don't weight one or the other. Like for example, mastery can roll on a 5-star piece, up to 5%, whereas HP rolls a little higher. So it definitely weights mastery a little less percentage-wise. Here, let me get a good example of this. Like, so on some 6-star pieces, you can roll way higher on HP rate. And I believe on a 6-star piece, the max theoretically is 8%, whereas the max on mastery, I believe, is 5%. And so we have to factor that in, that they're not necessarily the same here. Whereas see how this has already got 1 point rolled into mastery and is only at 6.8%. It's definitely not a full thing, but it's way easier to fully cap out, or not. It's way easier to get a big HP roll just because it has a higher a potential amount on HP. So we have to factor that in as well. And we also got to factor in survivability versus damage and see what's better. At the end of the day, when it comes down to after this testing, the mastery is slightly ahead of HP when it comes to damage, but only slightly. It takes a ton of total HP for mastery to start beating HP because we get it in all these other places. So in the grand scheme of things, that percentage of HP is significantly less than the total amount. So mastery is giving us more percentage value than the HP when it comes to damage. But it's so slight that I feel like for most content, unless you're just completely smoking that content and have no chance of losing, HP is going to be the way to go. One thing to keep in mind though is if you're not capping out on your HP, you're not capping out the HP burn amount here, where it's going off of 30% of your HP, you're not capping there, then mastery is just infinitely better, and that's the only way to really increase your damage, is going to be mastery. So that's going to be one thing to keep in mind, that when it comes to bosses, every single time, in my opinion, until you start to just completely wreck the boss, you're going to want to go HP over mastery, in my opinion. Because especially if you have a character like Sigmund here, because he scales off HP and he survives off HP. Healing is based off HP. There's so many things in this game that are about HP that focusing on that, if you want more damage, is when it comes to bosses, is going to be the way to go. That's why I used to always try to focus on about like 100% mastery, but I didn't know what mastery did. So I was just doing it because I saw the number go bigger. Whereas if I just focus on HP from like a per percentage amount, it's going to give me more survivability and it's going to do the same damage to bosses. I do lose damage on the waves though. And so that's one thing to keep in mind when it comes to this is, yes, you survive more, but clearing those initial 2 waves in dungeons, for example, are going to be significantly slower. So when it comes to like campaign clearing, you probably want to have a lot of mastery. But when it comes to dungeons, you're going to want to go HP, in my opinion, because like even with these characters here, I have a hard time surviving in stage 26. So I can get it on auto now, but it's because I can focus so much on speed and health and effect hit specifically, and then I just ignored the mastery portion because I know I'm going to be doing relatively close to the same amount of damage because I know the benefits of going HP versus mastery. So that's one of the things that I thought was very interesting and makes it to where free-to-play, like people that are struggling on gear, don't have to worry about this whole nother stat, and they don't need to feel like they're missing out too much because the things that really matter are surviving and actually beating these bosses. That's the thing that's going to benefit the most. Next thing, let's talk about bleed and how bleed works. And pretty much it's the exact same thing. Let me go to a bleed character here. So Hizaro, this guy, none of the math actually made sense when it came to his passive here. All the math that I was doing, it always came out to more. I had him fully booked when I was doing this. I couldn't figure it out when it came to his passive. Based on the math I was doing, I feel like he should have been doing a little bit more damage. And I could never get it exactly the amount. So what I ended up doing is actually using Reeves to test this because he's just a straight up normal bleed character that doesn't have any issues with like an extra modifier that didn't make sense. And when I did my testing, I removed all masteries, I removed like the sanctuary, all that stuff. Even though at the end of the day, it really didn't matter. I just wanted to know because you can check here in the equipment and you see all the base stats. On the left side, a lot of games will do this where they'll bake in other bonuses that you have into the base stats of the character. And I'm glad they do not do that in this game. It's all just, here's your base stats on the left, and then here's a combination of all your bonuses on the right. Unfortunately, it doesn't separate them. I wish we can like look into here and be able to see each bonus and where we're getting it from, whether it be Sanctuary, whether it be Talents, whether it be Arena. But since I removed literally everything except Arena, I was able to see the benefit I was getting from Arena, and then also just seeing the full base amount. So it made the test, actually legit in my opinion. So when it came to Mastery here, the thing that I thought was interesting about bleed characters is, okay, so how their damage works is takes 30, 50, all the way up to 165% attack damage based on the amount of stacks of bleed they have, and ignores defense stackable up to 10 layers. So Mastery in this situation works exactly the same. Whatever the damage you would have normally done, which is just 30, let's say one stack of bleed is 30% of my attack, and then what you would do is you would times it by, in this case, 0, because I have 4% mastery. What you would do is you would times it by 0.3 to get your one stack of bleed, and then times it by 1.04. And of course, this is not taking into account any emblems on here, just for the simplicity of this, but that is how you're going to calculate what the mastery did for you on this character. Doing the math though on this, what's interesting is how the units of mastery and attack go in this game. They're the exact same. Unlike how HP and mastery are a little different, where you can get a potentially on a 6-star piece 8% HP, whereas mastery and attack percentage, they roll the same, and it could be in the same range of like 5%, for example. So I wanted to see what was better, attack percentage or mastery. And in a vacuum here, the mastery and attack percentage increase your damage the exact same. So if you sacrifice the amount of HP, or you sacrifice the amount of attack you were going to be getting instead of mastery, you're always going to be doing the same amount of damage if you went with the attack version versus the mastery. Over time, the percentage difference between the attack and all the rest of your stats is going to be less. So it's actually better very slightly to get mastery as you get more attack, because you're going to be getting attack in way more sections of the game. Whereas mastery, you're not going to be getting it unless you have like a really big sanctuary, I believe. That'd be the only time you can actually get mastery here. Yeah, so you can get mastery here specifically, but you're getting way more attack from other sources, so that percentage of your total amount is actually impacting less. So that's why mastery is going to be technically, from a damage perspective, a better stat. Very, very slightly. And doesn't factor in that in game, there's characters that can boost your attack. And that attack is going to be affecting your basic attacks, whether how strong your crit is, all those things. So the fact that it's even close, in my opinion, means that attack percentage is way better than mastery for bleed characters. It's just always going to be the case because, for example, like on a Hazaro here, you have all these other modifiers that you got to factor in, and having more attack is going to affect that. So the only thing that really matters when it comes to attack characters, for the most part, is going to be getting the effect hit correct, and then getting as much attack percentage as you possibly can to make those bleeds hit as hard as possible. But then it gets really complicated when you start to factor in, okay, so I have X amount of attack. Do I factor in crit rate? Do I factor in effect hit? Do I factor in, more crit damage? All those things. That's when it gets super complicated, and I don't know the math for that. All I know is, just in a vacuum, mastery and attack percentage just for the bleed are very similar. So in that case, since attack affects more things, since attack can be boosted by people with an attack buff, for example, Slavilla here, she has a 40% attack buff that instantly makes all that attack better. Not only to factor in that attack is going to be affecting your basic attacks, all your other moves too. So in my opinion, it's a no-brainer. When it gets complicated is when you want to start factoring in, do I drop a little attack for crit rate? Do I drop a little attack for crit rate and crit damage? Do I, go for something like that? That's when it gets super complicated, in my opinion, and I don't know the answer to that. So just something to think about when it comes to your bleeders if you're trying to maximize your damage. So that's pretty much it when it comes to mastery. Very simply, it's just increasing the percentage damage based on the amount of mastery you have. So whatever damage you would do, times it by whatever your mastery is as a percentage increase, and there you go. And also, I noticed every time I would do a new change, you had to round down for the math to make sense. So they always round down, even if it's like it did something 0.9 in game, you would see a readout of the lesser number. It doesn't round up regardless. So that's pretty much it when it comes to this. Let me know in the comments below if you have any questions. I think this is actually good news because it allows us to focus for the most part on less stats, and we don't need to have this whole nother thing in mastery to worry about to actually do real damage, especially on our HP burn characters. If you're lucky enough to pull one of those guys seem even easier to gear, especially when you get to the harder content, with the really high HP bosses, because we can just build survivability anyway and do very similar damage. So with that, guys, I am out of here. Peace.